Okay, so who would like to ask a question of our panel? All right.
Okay, this is for Bernd. We were just talking. I can't do eggs because I'm sensitive to it now. What do you recommend instead of eggs and for proteins? And I can't do many beans either. So meat is my inflammatory source.
Well, have you tried pasture-raised eggs, where it's different than cage-free and free-range? You've done that, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. Have you done it? Do you eat it like where the egg yolk is still running and all that? So you've done all that. Okay, then you know what you got to do is beans also very difficult. They're high in phosphates. So legumes and beans are not a good thing to take, especially if you're going through an inflammatory condition. Grass-fed beef, I love lamb. Lamb seems to be very easy to handle. I was talking to a rancher that does cows and sheep and all. Lamb is one of the healthiest animals he's ever dealt with. So I would do lamb. I would do, collagen mixed with hydrolyzed casein is what we're doing with some of the athletes. And there I hear stories from the trainers from these professional teams that the combination is working amazing for these athletes, because casein is also non-inflammatory a lot. So I would start with something like that. Any other?
Okay, that's good. There was someone over here. All right.
So, Bernd, can you tell us a little bit about methylene blue?
Oh, God. Well, methylene blue, as you know, raises the complex 4, which is a mitochondrial cytochrome oxidase enzyme. And if you're going to do methylene blue, and I've been doing it, and I'm telling you, it's amazing, amazing. It does clear your mind and does give you a lot of energy. As a matter of fact, I have an athlete who was he had fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and he started doing this. And he was doing 1 drop a day. You don't need much. Actually, less is better. And one of the only problems, you have to be careful because of the it oxidizes the red blood cells. So don't do it with vitamin C at the same time. You can do it separately, like several hours after. And then don't go out in the sun immediately either, because it does cause oxidation of the red blood cells. So those are the things you got to be careful about. But it also lowers nitric oxide, which ENOS is very high in all cancer cells. It's published paper. Look it up. And I forwarded it to a number of my friends, like Robert Rowan. He read a lot about it, and he said, Bernd, you're absolutely right. NOS is found in cancer. So it does suppress NOS. So it's an excellent thing, simple. I will tell you, I have a physician in Mexico.
You should probably define NOS.
Yeah, nitric oxide, sorry. Yeah, so you don't want to increase it too much, and like Len said, do not overdo it with arginine. I've seen too many people with a lot of problems with that. Jeff is an MD, and his father just developed, I think it was Alzheimer's, and he started calling me up, and he started taking methylene blue, and he noticed a huge difference in his father. It's amazing, he says. So he's very excited. Another thing also that's very exciting out there, and I didn't tell you, there's going to be a whole conference coming up, NAD. There's one doctor here, I'll give you his name if I remember it. He's doing IVs, NAD, for detoxification of heavy metals, chemical, and alcoholic. And it's amazing what is happening. And NAD IV is going to be a very exciting new area to treat.
Okay, thank you. Do try to ask our panelists to be brief in their answers. Next question.
Would any of you like to comment on GC-MAF and cancer?
You have experience with it? Yeah.
Well, GC-MAF is one of the communications network macrophage activating factor that activates natural killer cells to target tumors when they see them, when they're not cloaked. So when they're uncloaked, they're very potent mechanisms. So there is an entity that started in Scandinavian countries, is now based out of then Belgium, now in the UK, that sells the product for use, and it is not approved in the United States, and you're required to subcutaneously inject it. Either once a day for severe cases or once a week, and as you build up over time, it's extremely expensive once you get to a dose that's considered therapeutic. But when your immune system is dormant against a cloaked tumor, then building up your GC-MAF is one mechanism. Now, my only experience with it was in a handful of patients, very end-stage, stage 4 cancer patients, and it had no clinical effect, but there are quite a lot of stories. But in my opinion, you need to go to someone with a deep experience.
Let me add one thing. Add vitamin D, because vitamin D is a receptor site for GMAC. And I talked to a number of scientists who were working with it, and they really said rather go with vitamin D and use certain levels of vitamin D. John Cannell is one of them.
Now, do you know there was an Italian researcher named Ruggiero who came up with a yogurt that produced a GC-MAF, the macrophage activating factor.
Yeah,
I actually had my hands on some of the, I learned to make yogurt, but it didn't grow hair back on my hair. And my hair. So
Yeah, optimizing vitamin D level is very important.
and you should know that one of the people with the most experience was Jeff Bradstreet. Did you hear about Jeff Bradstreet?
Yeah.
Okay, so the FDA tried to throw into me, because he is brilliant, courageous, good-looking, and a great doctor, the FDA tried to make him the example. And he ended up dead 1 week later with a bullet in the chest when they were trying to put him out of business. So they're calling it a suicide. I knew him.
And then there's a story,
It's not a suicide.
the concept of Nagalase. You've heard Nagalase, which is produced by tumor cells to suppress GC-MAF. And it could be, again, it's another interruption where high vitamin D levels can interrupt that process.
Yeah. So just to kind of confirm that we've all heard of it, and I had a homemade product, so I shouldn't have been joking about it, but at least I had hands-on experience. But the scuttlebutt amongst those of us who know each other is it does work. I mean, that if Bradstreet was doing it, I'll tell you right now, he knew what he was doing. He was a real great doctor.
So, yeah, I was going to say,
What circulating levels that are considered to be, to me, therapeutic in this type of a state where you're ill is 80 to 100.
But you do have to, having suffered with kidney problems, I will tell you, don't go it alone, because there is one case on record of a vitamin D at a fairly modest 10,000 or 12,000 with a multiple sclerosis and on medications and nobody winding this door. What happened is that she calcified her kidneys and died. So, I mean, you have to know a little what you're doing. This is natural medicine, after all, is very powerful. I woke up this morning at about 5:30 after, it doesn't matter the after, but what matters is I woke up with the worst pain I've ever had, I think, including the surgery and the 2 years where my body didn't like all that metal in me. And there was like a hole burning through my pelvic bone at the junction of L5 and the pelvis. I said, well, this is it, Dick. That's what, at 5 in the morning, that's what you think.
good
So I
caution.
went out and I took Salvestrol, and I took a biotin to go with it, and I took an Ololoa. And at 8 o'clock when I got up, it was gone. So the boogeyman is there, but it helps to know what you're doing. If you can find what you need. I didn't get to mention that. For me, as my message, if anybody wanted to take away what Kunin has to say, it is find out what you need. And what we can do in our field, any of us, using the laboratory, for example, or using our clinical experience, is focus in on the likelihood of this, that, or the other, and then only you will know if it works. I mean, you could follow it up. You may find a marker. You may find nagalase is a good one. You may find PSA could be a damn good one. Don't read the papers and let them tell you no. PSA tells you what's going on in your body. Yeah. And the same goes for C-reactive protein, or the same goes for your white blood cell count. The same goes for fibrinogen level. These functional things that define inflammatory process in relation to whatever else you got. So you may have the same numbers, but they mean different things to different people. It helps to get your markers and have some, and as well as pay attention, take care of yourself. So if something ain't right, you know it.
Okay, let's get our next question.
Hi, Dr. Ahvie. Can you, in your talk, you mentioned about redox signaling molecule. Can you elaborate a little bit more? And also, is there any contraindication for cancer patients?
Firstly, no, there's no contraindication for cancer patients. But redox signaling molecules is an emerging field, and basically it's the terminology for reduction and oxidation, which is basically the cell communications network is based on redox molecules. And you know what Bert put up, which was the topic he was supposed to talk about, which was NAD. And so ultimately, there's a tight coupling between this NAD and NADH, the oxidation and reduction of that molecule, that ultimately leads to the efficient production of ATP. When you're inefficient, you're off by a factor of 15 to 20 when you're not on that cycle, that proper cycle. You can tolerate it for long, long periods of time, obviously, because we have that ability, because this quantum computer works very well. But eventually you have some degenerative change. So the question is, how do you balance it? So you do it with all the things that we've been discussing today, but there are products now that you can drink. One of them is the one that you know about, which I have a lot of experience with, called ASEA. That's a product that has infused into it the redox signaling molecules. Why does it work? It works. I don't know why it works, because it has to have you have to have done lots of trial and error over many years to figure out the right formula. But ultimately, it puts you into the repair mode. It protects mitochondrial function, and mitochondrial function is equal to aging and repair. So the two are synonymous.
Question over here.
I don't actually have a question. I just wanted to share something that I think is really important. We have frequency CDs that we actually have photographs of cancer cells being exploded by the frequencies. You put the headphones right on the body. We also are starting some very serious research, but I wanted to share one of our instructors at our College of Sound Healing actually does voice healing on people. And he's got a really powerful voice. And he's now gotten rid of cancer in 85 people. And what's interesting is he doesn't focus on the cancer cells. I asked him, I said, what the hell are you doing in there? You know, he said he does not explode the cancer cells. He actually finds the emotional blockage that is holding the cancer and then breaks it up. And he says the cancer goes away on its own. And so I often like to point out that it's often, a lot of people say, it's the emotional blockages. And we haven't really even talked about it very much at all. And maybe if someone would want to address that.
I think you just did. But I just want to say that I am completely in agreement with what you just said. And I think that has to be re-emphasized and re-emphasized, that the psychic component cannot, and that's why I ended my talk and said this is not an intellectual exercise alone. You can leave it at that, but you're not necessarily going to go to the core of the issue and repair yourself more rapidly. You have to address repair on all levels.
We note the value of vitamin K and boron and vitamin D in bone formation. What is your opinion about cancer-induced pain and boron?
What was it? Boron.
Boron.
I haven't experienced it,
No.
so I can't give you a good answer. I mean, it does have an interaction with calcium, of course, but have you had some doing with it yourself?
Yes, I have a functional clinic for pain and a lot of osteoporosis patients that they don't respond to calcium and vitamin D, so we combine them vitamin D and vitamin K and boron up to 30 milligram, and fairly good results.
Well, okay.
Remember, when you do vitamin K, I've learned this from the man who developed vitamin K from Norway, is you have to add A and D with it. It makes it more complex, it makes it more bioavailable, and makes it work better. So just one over the other is not going to do it. Same thing when you add calcium and now magnesium with vitamin D and vitamin K and A, it works.
It goes naturally in my clinic because I have a fibromyalgia clinic, so they
Yeah.
have and the chronic fatigue, so they have the A naturally.
Yeah.
And I usually don't give the magnesium and calcium together because of the competition.
There's something called food. Heard of that?
Yeah, food.
That's sort of like the first thing to try. And it handles most of the things we deal with.
A lot of
You put in about 10 grams of vitamin C. It's like putting 50 bass drums in your orchestra.
Particularly if you live in California with all the fresh food we have to try it first.
Well, it's just a thought.
Okay, here's the other one.
I had a friend of mine diagnosed about a year or so ago with prostate cancer, and so he decided to do the seeds and radiation. And so a few months ago, he went in. He has bone cancer, pancreatic cancer, and liver cancer. So my question is, what did the radiation do?
Well, I think that's not that's not a happy story for sure. In fact, that's one of the first stories I had, an early case back in the 1980s of a similar nature. And of course, we all know that radiation alters the redox system of the body, and in particular depletes the antioxidant system. And it's important to know it's not just a one-horse shay. It's not just one item, but we're talking about several vitamins, and then we're talking about particularly the internal system, which includes a cascade of superoxide dismutase, catalase, and glutathione peroxidase as three major enzymes, plus, for good measure, glutathione transferase to make everything work. And perhaps we have to get in there also with a riboflavin enzyme, the glutathione reductase, to recycle it. And when you see the complexity and the layer on layer of fail-safe mechanisms Mother Nature has, you have to thank our lucky stars that Mother Nature has made it possible for us to eat and replete. That is, to maintain these systems that are life-saving and health-giving systems. When you're throwing in radiation therapy without some backup support for these systems, you're committing quackery. And that happens to be, I'm saying this because I'm an old man now, and I tell it like it is, because it's very interesting. Perhaps just the best way to say it is, alternative medicine is considered a form of tolerable quackery. And then you go to UCSF and find out that they operated on me, for example, near death, at my worst, and nobody was looking. They wanted to give me strong opiates afterwards. I took no opiates. I did the surgery and just came out of it with 2 doses. It did nothing. I tried marijuana, made me hate life. I wanted to think, and marijuana made it impossible to think. So I just kept healthy. The natural high is really what I think that's what we're all about here, is let the message, for example, of pain, whoever was mentioning pain, let the message at least mean something protective. If you look at pain that way and train your mind, I mean, up to a certain point, I'll grant you overwhelming, blinding pain is something else, but everyday pain is quite tolerable, and especially if you realize it protects you from doing stupid things. That looked at that way, that's sort of a medical responsibility to sell that. So radiation, cut, burn, and poison, the whole bit, are clearly a second or third choice when you haven't got something better. But the first choice is nutrient-related stuff like food, but food that represents what you need. And one of the things, at least for me, I don't think I'm too different from everybody else, I like to measure the whole spectrum of nutrients, minerals, toxic stuff, even that organic acids. If you did nothing else, organic acids, and look to see what systems are out and how much are we seeing in the urine, how much are we seeing of waste products. Is there, as a marker for, you don't know exactly what the poison is, but you know poison's a piece of the action. It's very important to recognize malnutrition, pollution, and stress are what health medicine is all about. Yeah, genetics, so you, for $100 you get 23andMe, and that'll tell you your weak spots too. And by general medicine, generally speaking, what we're talking about is damage control. Get a blood count. Are you anemic? Are your white cells out of whack? Is what, you know, what's broken? A urinalysis. Is there pus in it, blood in it? Is there crud in it? What's broken? You see what I'm getting at? Damage control. You get into the chemistry panel. Is that liver all wound up, tied up in knots? Are your kidneys, is the creatinine backed up so that you're on the transplant list? Is your sugar up into the stratosphere? You're finding out there what's broken, but you're not finding out what you need. What you need first is to know what the nutrient needs of your body are, and yes, if you can, how do they relate to the genetic individuality of your body at the same time, to what extent we can do it so far. Anyway, end of speech. Just to let you know, you're not here just to be scrapping at straws. We're looking to know concepts.
I have a question for Dr. Saputo. And by the way, I really enjoy the wisdom of this panel, especially Dr. Saputo and Kunin. I mean, there's of course brilliance and wisdom. The question is...
I'm going to tell that to my wife.
She disagrees?
I hope not, but occasionally.
You can lay it out. We'll fix them later, don't worry.
No, my question, I know how infrared light is really good for neuropathy caused by diabetes. Is it as effective for neuropathy caused by chemotherapy?
No, but it's very effective. For diabetes, it's a slam dunk. There you can take somebody with mild to moderate diabetic neuropathy that's painful, and in 2 or 3 treatments of 10 minutes on a machine that we have, the symptoms are largely gone of the pain, the numbness is improved, and balance is improved. With the chemotherapy-induced neuropathies, particularly because people keep getting chemotherapy, you make them better, then they go back to their oncologist and say, well, my symptoms are better, so I can go ahead and take more chemotherapy. But it's a bit more difficult, and I have a lot of people who I see once a week or once every 2 weeks for that, but they don't have to be on the Neurontin or the Lyrica or the antidepressants or the other pain medicines. They're largely on no medicines at all. So it is very effective, and it's better than anything else. Until that's replaced by something, it's a crime that people don't know about this.
And I know you use the photonic stimulator for like something superficial like neuropathy in the feet. Is like these devices you can buy online, Amazon, and so are they also quite effective?
Some of them are, some of them aren't. It depends on the power. So it's the wavelength and the frequency. It's the number of joules that you put out per certain amount of time that makes that difference. And I work with somebody who invented a lot of this technology maybe 20, 25 years ago and is still making equipment as a hobby. Yeah. And so every 2 weeks he says, you got to try this one, Len. This one's even better. And it usually is. In fact, he's finding a place where I think, thank God, he's going to take this to market and try and get it out there so people can buy it. But the problem is that doctors don't understand it. And so they throw it out and think it's ridiculous.
Thank you. We on? Okay. I just wanted to comment, actually, rather than ask a question, comment in addition to you on this gentleman who asked some questions tonight about his medical condition. I asked him some questions about his mouth, his dentistry, and I'm convinced that that's the source of many of his problems. He has 2 root canals, several crowns, and over 6 amalgams. And I have enough experience in doing biological dentistry and surgery to tell you that even his eyesight problems are very likely due to the physical presence of the root canals in proximity to his eye. And my suggestion, and what I see with many of my patients, is that first you detoxify his head, and then you see what happens after that. Because fundamentally, what's going on is that his body's regulated by his nervous system. You know that, in conjunction with his hormonal system, and his mouth is juxtaposed between the thyroid, pituitary, and the brain. The laws of nature are still going on here. He's got mercury venting. He's got mercury attaching to the gold in the crowns that he has, and he's got dead teeth. So you have a biological problem there too. So my suggestion is, before you start throwing a lot of other medicine and stuff at him, you detoxify that. You'll see that his head won't, I think his head is swollen, and the swelling will come down. Thankfully, he's going to see an acquaintance of mine in Texas, and I think if he comes back to talk to you later, that's all going to change. My other suggestion is not to add any more burden to his body, which is remove the problems and stay in a removable situation, non-metallic, until he's healthy, and then he can consider replacement with artificial body parts. Okay? So anyway, that's my take.
Just to,
Great comments.
just to
Any
round that
follow-up?
off, to merge your thoughts with my earlier comments, which is to say that the mercury element, over a period of time, accumulates a mercury burden in the lining of the gut, in a sulfur lining called metallothionein layer, and that this, incidentally, is easily converted into, well, it's absorbed both as elemental mercury and as methyl mercury, depending on how many methyl groups are passing through the gut. But it ends up in the liver, where it interferes with the functions of the methylation system, particularly relative to methionine synthase and the production of methionine and SAMe, which are the antidotes I was talking about that are required by the liver to maintain itself in the midst of a lifetime exposure to a myriad of chemicals much more complicated than any one of us could explain.
And it's a little bit dangerous.
I think it's just, I think honestly his issues are multifactorial.
Thank you.
You know, that's just it.
Yeah, that's the point. I think we need to look at the whole person. And so it would take an hour and a half or two to sit with him and find out what his life story is and what the issues are that have been challenges to his molecular biology, or however you want to look at it. And at that point, maybe have a better idea of an integrative approach to managing his complaints.
I'd like to, my natural tendency is to deal with bottom-up mechanisms in terms of nutrition and metabolism and stuff like that, but I'd like to invert the whole issue and ask you, do you have specific recommendations of neuroendocrine-oriented, psychological integration-oriented, or spiritual-oriented approaches to dealing with cancer?
Are you asking me?
Actually,
Play golf.
So I thought you were going to do a follow-up to his comment, so this is a new question. We'll go ahead with that, and then we'll see if we have
Okay,
any.
but I didn't take a lot of time for that one.
Well, there's a lot to that. I think the spiritual side of what's happening is really important. So looking at the whole person and looking at the spiritual side of what's involved is a key part of every evaluation. So I agree with you.
Well, remember, I'm a psychiatrist at the beginning, a decision I made at age 15. By the time I got into molecular medicine in 1967, I was already, golly, what would they make me, 36? Yeah, we're close to 40, an old man already. And I can only tell you that therapies work that satisfy the needs of the person at the time. You know, in my case, I had a toxic headache based on my own methylfolate mutations and my own double mutations also in the B12 sector. So I never knew what hit me when I had a headache for 20 years, every day, all day, going through medical school. It wasn't the fault of medical school, and it wasn't the fault of my libido. I read Adele Davis when one of my grad students from Stanford talked me into using megavitamins, and it worked. And then I read Adele Davis seriously, and it said, eat liver. So damn it, I ate liver. It was awful. My headache was gone in 20 minutes.
Right.
Liver. rich source of active vitamin B12 and folic acid and B6 and just about everything else you need. A substitute for eggs.
Richard, let me share something. Chicken liver is one of the best things if you can get it. Absolutely. I had
Arsenic in it.
I had two patients and when I was in practice, and I think one of them was here and she left. She had cancer and she didn't want to get in front of you, but she had breast cancer. And what I did with her was I had her look in the mirror every day and just say, I love myself, I look great, and I resonate with happiness. And then I had her in the nighttime visualize her cancer going away with white light. I had another patient that came in and her wife, they were couples from Pescadero. He had lung cancer and she had breast cancer. And what they did was they took a program, a visualization that we worked with, and they went to the ocean every day and they visualized the waves coming and hitting them. Actually, they did. As the waves went out, they saw their cancer leaving them. And 6 months later, they went to their oncologist. Both of them were free of cancer. And this woman that left here, I wish she would have stayed. She would have loved to express, she tried every nutritional, every type of diet, and nothing worked until she did visualization of herself eliminating the cancer and having a positive attitude and love. And that's how it worked.
How long was your follow-up?
Okay, so we have time for one more question here.
This is 10, 15 years now.
Bernd, could you tell me the name of the book that Richard Miller wrote that you mentioned? You didn't say the name of it.
Richard Miller, PhD, wrote, I was really looking at caloric restriction diet because I worked with Roy Wolford. And one of the things that Ray Pete and I talk about, and I was introduced to Richard Miller because of John Ferber, was the restriction of tryptophan as a, that mimics caloric restriction diet. But not only that, his big thing was the mTOR pathway, as you know, is one of the contributing factors to aging, cancer, and disease, and you want to suppress it. And by reducing cysteine, methionine, and tryptophan, they showed that it does reduce the mTOR pathway, but also mimics caloric restriction diet. As a matter of fact, there's a whole group that did a restriction of these amino acids correlating to caloric restriction, and they were able to find every evidence that they can promote health, healing, and recovery, but they also reduce cancer and other diseases.
What was the name of the book?
Richard Miller is he's the author, publisher of the, he was presenting this, and John Ferber was at the conference. It's called, his name is Richard Miller, MD, PhD. Look him up. He's published.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I didn't know he had.
It's a good idea to add, because people should know this, that caloric restriction and heavy exercise have the same effect, which is to induce the enzyme betaine methyltransferase. So, in other words, betaine again comes into the play as the common denominator for all kinds of beneficial effects for multiple kinds of health-related issues. It just helps to know that. And sometimes it's convenient, inexpensive, and efficient to take a capsule too.
You know, one thing we haven't covered here is that in my world, cancer isn't a fight. I think the war against cancer is bullshit, okay? And that, well, that's my world.
It's money.
Well, that is about money, but I'm looking at what do people need? People need to heal. You can cure their symptoms, and so what? What did they get from this lesson? I have lots of people who have cancer, and I guide them very personally in their demise.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's a wonderful opportunity to learn from things like this, and you may die from your disease and be healed from it at the same time. So the idea of fighting against anything is contrary to the way I like to think. It's a peaceful thing. You've been granted this thing, and it has lots of consequences that any fool can see you don't want. But the lessons that come from it can be brilliant. If you look at what happened, and most people have had cancer for a period of time where they can adjust to it, it's something where they say, I never would have learned these things had I not had a positive attitude and learned from the lessons that were offered to me by Spirit.
Okay, Ahvie, would you like to say any? Everybody's had one last word, I think, except for you. So.
Well, I think from the example that you pointed out when your friend had seeded radiation, so that's going to war. And with war comes collateral damage. And unless you have people coming in and providing support, unless you have the support, unless you provide support to the systems that normally repair things, you will have deeper collateral damage. So make sure that you take care of the whole system on all levels, but also make sure that your pathways are supported by basic things. And you can choose any number of different diets. You can choose any different number of supplements. Some are more intelligent than others. But make sure that you pay attention to it. And don't, unfortunately, you cannot ask your doctor most of the time for this advice because we don't get taught it in medical school. On the spiritual side, there are 6 major medical schools in the United States now that are teaching mindfulness to medical students. I believe it takes a half of one day. So we're going to need to wait at least one more generation for the medical doctors to be able to participate in a way that's meaningful.
All right, yeah, we're going to have to. Yeah, for our whole panel. Quick word. Did you have a quick word?
Let's just do a quick summary of everything. One of the things we didn't talk about, I'd like to just cover, is lipopolysaccharides,
We
endotoxin.
actually don't have time to do this. We have to
Carrots,
close up.
bamboo shoots, and mushrooms will bind to endotoxins in your gut. If you start with that, you start the healing process.
Okay, thank you. Come see Bernd. So one more hand for our panel, please. Thank you all for attending. Again, next month, September 17th, Dave Asprey and biohacking. He's Bulletproof Diet, the founder of Bulletproof.
Richard, you want some of this?